So I guess, Ronell Ellis, here, guest chair, like to open up the meeting, with some introductions, I guess. And if you, any introductions and announcements. I guess I introduced myself already, so next.
Good afternoon, I'm Kiki Ferris. I am the Assistant Chief Probation Officer over supervision in our juvenile hall.
Marcus Walton, Director of Communications at the Contra County Office of Education.
Patrice Guillory here, Office of Reentry and Justice.
Online,
Garyana Youngblood, also with the Office of Reentry and Justice.
Jill Ray with the Office of Supervisor Candace Anderson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Contra Costa with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice.
right, cool. Welcome, everybody. Do we have any public comments at this time? Under the RJOB agenda, if any, do we have any public comments?
For now, I don't have a comment, but I do have a couple announcements. There are a couple of community events that are coming up that might be of interest to folks on our job and also the broader community. I think we spoke at the last quarterly meeting about the free screening that will be taking place on May 16th at 5 p.m. to 6:30. It's a film titled Judging Juries. It is a documentary looking at the lack of diversity in jury pools across the country. And that's being co-sponsored by the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, as well as the RISE Center. And it'll be held at the RISE Center on May 16th. And the following will be a panel discussion that includes some of our own local justice leaders. So D.A. Beckton will be on the panel, public defender Ellen McDonald, a former Alameda County judge will be speaking. And then there's one other, keep forgetting the one extra panelist. But nonetheless, that will be taking place. There will be a subsequent free film screening of the same film in East County, May 30th. Some more details to come on that, and that's also partnership between Office of Racial Equity and Justice and then this time Safe Return Project. The other bit of information to share is that there is a work group of practitioners in the space of guaranteed income that will be hosting a online, hosting a webinar to sort of give a 101, if you will, on guaranteed income. That's going to take place on May 20th from 3 to 4 p.m. They'll also lift up and highlight some of the guaranteed income pilots that are currently taking place here in Contra Costa, but then also uplift other programs that have been notable across the country. So we do have some flyers here in the room on the table about those events. Happy to share it out to our broader networks. To share that.
Sounds good, thank you. We just had somebody step in the room, so intro.
Peter Kim with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice.
Thank you. So I guess we'll approve records of action from the April 11th meeting. Refer to this page 4. Just put that into a motion or what?
Yeah, so you'll call for a motion to approve.
All right, so I put a motion on the floor to approve the record of action from the April 11th meeting.
So moved.
Second. Anybody? Everybody scream. All right.
I wasn't present, but I think I can still second.
Thank you, Kiki. All right, so Record of action has been approved and voted on and accepted.
Ronell,
Um,
Ronell,
yeah,
can I take a roll call? Can I take a roll call vote to approve the record of action?
please go ahead.
Okay, Kiki,
Yes.
Marcus,
Yes.
Ronell,
Yes,
3 yeses, motion carries, record of action is approved.
please interject at any time you see that happen. Thank you. Thank you.
You're doing
Yeah,
great.
appreciate it. Appreciate it. So at this time, we'll discuss the community capacity fund. Is that correct?
Yes, so, what you have attached or included in your packet is a copy of the last community capacity fund, proposal document, that was prepared, oh gosh, maybe almost over a year ago at this time. And so I don't see Chris on today, but nonetheless, during the quarterly meeting, gosh, when was this? Yeah,
A week.
there's conversations about, really prioritizing and fleshing this, proposal out a little bit further. There were also discussions about, this being a potential proposal to bring forward, or at least a discussion item at the future, joint special meeting with the equity committee. And, also as sub bullets here, to kind of further round out this conversation, we have an example of a previous capacity building program and lessons learned from that. It's also attached here as an evaluation of the AB 109 capacity building program that took place several years ago. I want to say maybe in 2018 or so. And then discuss creation of a grid on capacity building efforts that currently exist in the county or are currently underway or being built up. And so you do have a handout that's also here with you. We just sort of listed out some of these capacity building or capacity funding efforts in the county. Some of these would include the Youth of Promise Fund, which is a partnership between probation and Antioch Community Foundation that allows for the distribution of mini grants, small mini grants of up to 10,000 to small organizations that are serving youth out in East Contra Costa, with a particular focus on serving youth at risk of system involvement. And then there's the Measure X capacity building resources that were recently approved, where a total of $1 million would be dedicated to support community-based organizations out in East and Central County. So not a whole lot of work has been done on that just yet, but at least the dollars have been allocated for that purpose. The potential vehicle for that has not yet been determined. And then the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, where our directors are here, can speak a little bit about their plans in regards to their capacity building effort. That's part of their work plan for the coming year. Then we have our jobs, capacity building, essentially recommendation, right, from the Racial Justice Task Force to establish this community capacity fund, which obviously has been something we've been talking about. And then the sort of skeleton proposal is in your packet. On the back of this handout, there's another capacity fund that exists, but that's outside of county departments. It's called the East Contra Costa Strong Collaborative Fund. It is a collaboration, if you will, of various local funders, 7 to 8 local funders, and I believe the convening funder is East Bay Community Foundation. But nonetheless, their goal is also to establish sort of this network of nonprofits that they can then support, apply a racial equity lens to their efforts, and building up the capacity of these organizations to better service the community. And then lastly, is the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, though not necessarily dedicated to capacity building in the traditional sense that we would think of, but they do provide small grants, anywhere between $500 and $10,000 a year. The total amount that goes out is about 1.4 million. And that comes out of the department, that's in the county, and that comes out of the Department of Conservation and Development, somewhat overseen by Supervisor Glover's office. And it's a mitigation fund, so it was settlement resources, specifically targeting the Pittsburgh Bay Point area. And anyhow.
Yeah, can I maybe add a little bit?
Sure.
So for each of these, as we will go backwards, as Patrice offered, right? The Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, it's not capacity building in the way that we typically think, but they do frame these as like augmentation or support grants. It's not to prop up brand new programming, but really to how do you kind of sustain, expand, or build upon things that are already happening. So in a way, it does build capacity if we think of it through a more broad lens. And similarly with the Strong Collaborative Fund, I don't know if they have any specifically a fund that is specifically dedicated just capacity, but they are very tuned into the needs of grassroots emerging organizations that they support programming. And I know that they often support folks when they say that is a need in their kind of funding structure. So that's why we put it in there. But don't want to get confused. I don't think they've actually had an explicit capacity building fund. What I say about our ORESJ, that was something that Kendra and I have put out there as priority for this coming year. But then, given we were tasked with the work for the African American Holistic Resource Wellness and Resource Hub and putting out a feasibility study, RFQ for that, RFP, now putting out an RFQ for an additional $1 million that's going to be put towards that work. That's kind of been bumped down our list, priority list. However, it does make some sense because we want to align our pretty modest and really nominal $100,000 priority capacity fund. We want to align it with what else is happening, so we kind of just fill in the gap. But that, that gap won't really be clear until we have a sense where all these other ones are moving, particularly that Measure X. We know that the two council supervisor numbers, I'm sorry, two supervisors, for both Central and East, that's the people, Glover and Burgess. They're going to be talking with community folks and other folks within the county to really assess the best way to roll it out. So it's a lot of stuff is still in the air. The only other thing I want to add is there is something that was through Measure X called the Innovation Fund. That was put out last year. It was identified. It was first going to be just a one single year time effort. However, and because of the funds that were identified this year, that they anticipate having some surplus, they did roll out a second year of it. So those are already awarded, but it's called an Innovation Fund. There are queries about, I've seen about 6 different organizations that have applied. I don't know if those proposals have all been, they've been recommended, but I don't know if they've been approved. But the total amount of money that's going to go out from that fund is about just under 1.8 million. So yeah, this helps us get a sense of what's happening out there and what funds are floating around and contribute to supporting community-based organizations doing the important work on the ground.
So what did you want to do? When you mentioned that, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, the only thing I would just say is that, so for this body's consideration, where things left off was an attachment to this sort of federal proposal. This was presented to, at the time, PPC before, and request was for our job to kind of flesh this out a little bit more and give a little bit more detail compared to what is provided. So given that this was recommended item to be prioritized by the full body. And knowing all of the various capacity building, new funds that are coming out to do something similar, be good to have this body sort of talk through and discuss what is the best kind of pathway forward in terms of what a community capacity fund will look like.
So with that being said, I know we talked a little bit about it and discussed it in our last meeting, our last subcommittee meeting. We didn't get very far because I know Chris had mentioned the how. We talked about um, you know, finding funding or seeing if we needed funding even for ourselves as a committee to see what we wanted to do with getting the community engaged, right? So how is we gonna go about that? What would it look like? What would it take? What would our ideas be? What would our approach be? We know a lot of people, as far as the community can't make it to meetings like this, especially on a regular basis. So, being that we meet in the middle of the day or the end of the day, a lot of people are working. So, where do we want to go with that? As far as how do we want to approach getting the community involved so we can have more input from the community about how to, their input, right, about all this stuff, about raising funds and providing services for the community. We wanted more community input as opposed to just the committee itself. So, any ideas on that or any comments? Anybody?
I think one of the important pieces, and I hate to keep repeating myself on this, but we did some work around outreach for this. I want to say 2 years ago now. It's been some time, and I'm glad to see it come back. But I'd like us to go back and grab the work that we did on this a couple of years ago. Obviously, there are probably new organizations. Some of the organizations we reached out to are probably may no longer be operational. So I think we should go back and revisit the work that was done, see what updates need to happen in terms of the information we collected from community-based organizations at that point. The other piece is that part of this also talks about juvenile organizations as well. And I want to make sure that we're not either duplicating work or working at cross purposes with the JJCC. We want to make sure that the work we're doing is moving forward, not simply repeating the work that's been done in the past. So I think we have some good foundation on the work that has been done that we can build upon. So I think that is one of the first steps we need to take in terms of getting information out to the community. That's work that I don't think that the committee can do by itself. We need to coordinate with community partners to get that information out. And so I think, and I could be wrong, and Kiki or anyone else, please correct me if my memory is faulty, but one of the big pieces was people want to know, well, where's the money? What's the money? That was the very first question that was asked while we're going through this process. We encourage people to apply, and then we sort of, for whatever reason, it did not go forward. And so we need to be prepared for some skepticism going back out without having a defined amount total, a process by which folks can apply. So I would hesitate to start a process again without getting some firm commitments from the Board of Supervisors around this, around this fund. The direction from the main our job committee is to continue the work. We'll continue the work, but I would just want us to be cognizant of the work that's been done in the past and hesitation from community partners, considering that we didn't quite finish last time we started this.
Anybody else?
I mean, I have a similar, I don't even know if it's a call a concern, but because of the timing, right? I'm trying to pick up work that I started in middle of March and it has already changed. So it's like, so I worry that whatever we were discussing at the time, you know, that we were discussing it, I know we had a bit of a hiatus on the subcommittee too. The needs or the preferences or the situation could be different from when we last sort of talked about this and what the needs were. But then again, and I think you kind of hinted on this just a little tiny bit, we keep running into a situation where it feels like we're asking the same questions of the same people over and over. And I'd just like to be mindful of that because of the frustration that he kind of points out. People were getting tired of answering the same questions, only to give us the same answers, and they haven't seen much action. So just figuring out, and don't have an answer by any stretch of the imagination, but figuring out how to address that, or at least at least acknowledge, you know, that we respect that there has been a gap, there hasn't been any action, and kind of here is where we are, and try to find a way that this would continue no matter which of us are sitting in these seats going forward, because I see that as being an issue too, as someone who's now, I don't know, what year am I on, 3? There's been so much shift and turnover and even the committee members, which, you know, naturally occurs, but I think we also need to do some capacity building of our own to make sure that we can carry these things forward as we kind of get them restarted.
Yeah, I agree. My thoughts are, just kind of like, I mean, which direction we want to go in. That's, as a subcommittee, I just took this role, but, I'm just trying to find out the climate of committee, I mean, we all in agreement, let's not go forward without making sure we took care of what we was already tasked to do. But how do we do that? Let's just get it all together. We go over it, make sure it's, you know, valid stuff before we even think about doing something different or, you know, just the approach to that. But I agree, don't start nothing else if you haven't finished what you already started. So, that's clear vision. That's kind of like 101. So, I'm in agreement of that. Anybody online that wants to chime in? Gigi, I see your hand.
Thank you, and sorry I couldn't be there. I had a dental procedure today. Didn't know how I was going to be feeling, but I did want to say, you know, none of us want to carve out any time when we're not doing something productive. But I always also, based on the title of this particular committee, I had never really wrapped around the thought that I could be inviting other community stakeholders into these subcommittee meetings. And so I think I know a lot of individuals who would want to participate if it's about capacity and having more folks chime in to support the work that we're doing. It's really difficult to make it to Martinez sometime for a 3 to 5 meeting. Is there any opportunity for us to look at another location to enhance our participation or even the time? Is this a set time that we have to meet? Because I run into a problem and feel like I'm making a major sacrifice anytime I leave Martinez at 5 o'clock.
I think changing meeting times is like a vote situation. I know we have our expert on the line.
Yeah.
I think changing meeting times requires a vote, if I'm not mistaken, but I think there would be opportunity for us to also vote to put a special meeting at a special time. et cetera, for something like that, that would require kind of what Gigi's mentioning, where there's a lot of community outreach and engagement to CBOs and emerging and established to come in and have a conversation that's on the agenda.
Yeah, and I'm mentioning that because it was brought up in our last meeting and we talked about that. But I do think, before we get to that point about really trying to absorb, new folks and community folks, we have to have some meat and potatoes that we're trying to feed them, right? So, I think just trying to get stable and establishing our, footing, to, have something concrete, that we want to share with them, we need to have that in place. And then it would be a strategic thing that we're doing, bringing folks in.
Don't we have goals, objectives? I thought each committee had defined some goals, and I thought that's how we spent our last meeting. So if we're not building from the meetings before, I could see how we would feel lost and like we're not making progress.
Yeah, but we didn't, let me see. I recall some of that, but then we stopped the meeting abruptly. And then also, it was Chris's concern about, just the way we were approaching those tasks that I wasn't clear on, and I thought we was gonna discuss it some more, and that's why I'm bringing it up now. But it still may be something to table or could be moot point, so I don't know. But
So in, meetings past, there have been, copies of the work plan, previous year's work plan that I think this body continues to operate from. There's also, from the larger body meetings, which, we just had one not too long ago, where there's certain items that come up and it's being essentially requested or referred to the respective subcommittee that would then work on that. So, so you do have a sense of direction, and it has been, those objectives have been laid out. And I think that the purpose of today's meeting is to sort of follow up on some of those prior conversations.
so with that, I don't know too much. I don't know what to say regarding, what you just mentioned, Gigi, about having those goals and objectives in place and just targeting those in specifically. But, I know that this one thing that we're talking about now, it has been one of our bigger ones that, has kept us kind of stagnant or, lack of, better word, but, kind of progressing, because I think we all agreed in our last meeting that we wanted to do something to take this committee to another level. But we also all agree in agreement that, some of the things we left behind, may need to be picked back up before we can do that. Go ahead, Gigi.
I'm curious, I came in late, so maybe I came into the middle of a conversation. Was there a particular objective that we were discussing prior to my entry into the meeting?
No, it's the capacity fund. So we only been on one subject so far. You're not far behind. You're right there.
Yeah, and so I recall last meeting's conversation about the capacity fund was positioning policy for organizations to have more access to funds, right? That advanced the work that the our job is responsible for, versus me coming and signing up to be on this committee, thinking that there was funds available to like promote, like the trauma healing and all of that in response to what happened in Antioch. So I got new information when I came last month about there being more like policies put in place. And then that led us to a conversation around what the RFPs might look like and what language might need to be put into the RFPs to make sure that there's some movement in the right direction. Like,
That was definitely part of it.
yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
If I could, I think, and I just want to make sure, yes, we need to do this work. Again, I think a lot of the work was done a couple of years back when we started the process. And if I recall correctly, that there just wasn't any funding allocated, right? Christopher explained that the funding wasn't allocated and things sort of stopped. So my question would be, if we're going to do this capacity fund, where do we get the guarantees that there's going to be funding for it, right? We can do all of this work, we can set it up, but we are then dangling a carrot that's not really there in front of these community organizations. They're going to come, they're going to do the work, we're going to ask them the same questions again, and our job may want to prioritize this. We were told they wanted to prioritize this the last time we did this work. And I'm not saying that it's disingenuous on their part, but we need to figure out, is there going to be a capacity fund? But that, I think that's the number one question. Is there funding? What's the funding? And then we can come up with but if we go through this process again, we've done the work. And if we need to do the work again, we'll do the work again. I am not an advocate of repeating things that we've already done. So we can bring people in, no problem. We can take the show on the road. We can we can do all of that. But is there money? Is, I think, going to be the number one question. If we identify that there is money, there's a commitment to whatever the dollar amount is, $10,000, $100,000, whatever it is, there will be money that we need to set up a process for and come up, do the work around it. But I don't see the necessity of redoing this work if there's no money. So I hate to keep repeating that, but
No, that's good. We'll just make sure she has this question.
No, I'm in agreement. I mean, I wouldn't want to waste, and I would use the word waste my time on repeating the process if the end goal is that we wouldn't be able to have results for fruits from our labor. So I thought I heard Patrice say at the last meeting that there is pockets of money that we could potentially tap into. I thought I heard her say AB 109. Maybe I was at a different meeting. And that maybe we don't have to duplicate and we could collaborate with some of the other efforts already in place based on some of the work you guys had done in the past. I don't carry a history of the past. I'm fairly new to this committee.
Yeah, so to that point, that's where this handout was created. And I know you don't have it there, Gigi, or some of the folks online. We do have a brief overview of current capacity funding efforts in the county. And just to reiterate really quickly again, since you're just joining on, we've identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different capacity related funds and/or funding. Those include the Youth of Promise Fund, which is a partnership between the Probation Department and the Antioch Community Foundation, where there are many grants of up to 10,000 that are distributed out to youth serving organizations supporting youth at risk of criminal justice system involvement out in East County. And the total amount for that fund as of now is 100,000. Then there's Measure X dollars and a total amount of 1 million that was allocated by the Board of Supervisors to support capacity building for community-based organizations serving East and Central County. Right now, that has not been structured as of yet, but in terms of how those resources would be distributed, but those dollars have been allocated nonetheless. Then the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice has its own capacity building effort that is moving to work on total amount. I think listed here was potentially 100,000, but we just heard that given the work around the African American uh, wellness ballistic, I'm sorry, I'm butchering the name of it. Okay, that right now, the capacity building effort right now is not as high up, of a priority. So, but it's not totally off the table, I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
Okay, and then our job obviously has a standing recommendation for the creation of a community capacity fund, which when this was first recommended, mind you, this preceded all of the others I just mentioned. So it's an older recommendation, right? That's still looking to be fleshed out to some degree. Then there is the East Contra Costa Strong Collaborative Fund. This is a collaboration between local philanthropic organizations. This is not affiliated with the county specifically, but they're looking to, or have been looking to seed support for nonprofits in East Contra Costa with a specific lens toward incorporating racial equity into that work. And then we've also identified the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, though not specifically calling out capacity building of organizations. They do provide smaller grants for nonprofits who are serving Pittsburgh, Bay Point, and Antioch areas. What is attached to the agenda is a previous AB 109 capacity building project. It's no longer in existence, but Chris talked about a group called Jewel Legacy Group that came and did a presentation. That was the very group that actually was in contract with ORJ at the time when it was in the CAO's office to develop this capacity building project with reentry service providers. And so in your agenda packet is the evaluation summary of that project. And it includes some lessons learned from that. So all to say that there's a little bit of both some history and some current work being done around capacity building. And I think the charge or the sort of question mark, if you will, to be addressed by this body is how then does this older recommendation to create a community capacity fund fit within, or how can it be reshaped to maybe be a gap filler, given all of these various efforts that are currently underway, but also keeping in mind that what's currently underway has not also been formulated either. Especially the Measure X dollars that have been allocated for the 1 million that have been allocated out for capacity building efforts. And then the one absolute last thing I would say in terms of the expansion of resources for reentry services that are being funded through AB 109, that there are a set of proposals that will be presented at the next CCP meeting on Monday. This was an effort led by the Community Advisory Board, approved by CCP and PPC, to take 15 million one-time allocation from the AB 109 fund balance to then expand reentry services specifically in 4 areas: housing, behavioral health, pre and post release engagement, and employment. So again, not necessarily capacity building in the sense of like coaching and supporting folks and organizations and learning how to do grant writing and those kind of things, but it is capacity, or it's expansion of services, increasing the capacity of the reentry service system overall. So when we talk about capacity building, it's just a range, right, of strategies that can be employed. And so though on one level, it is about making sure that dollars are allocated, and also what are you structuring to be where those dollars will then be allocated for.
What I was gonna point out before that beautiful re-synopsis was exactly that the timeline of sort of what's happened, because we started this conversation before many, if not all of these other things existed. So as I was listening to kind of us all talk, I was wondering if we should be taking a different angle and either, because we are a mega collaboration of all kinds of county and community-based systems as an our job and as certainly as a subcommittee. So what if we sort of reimagine, because now all these other capacity building things exist, we could maybe do some engagement and support to some of these other capacity building plans. I think we just heard Peter say that now they have different priorities, for example, but they already wanted to do this thing, and maybe that's an idea, that instead we sort of uplift some of these other capacity building efforts. Maybe even do some surveying of sort, I'm just using that term loosely, like Youth of Promise Fund, I'll use as an example because it's something that we support. Having some conversations with those agencies and with the Antioch Community Foundation about what's working and what's not, and identifying some gaps or some needs, seeing if those needs could be fulfilled by one of the other people on this list. I think there's a way that we kind of shift our focus. And then I think once we've maybe done that supportive work, we can better identify if there is a need for this particular capacity fund, and if that need has changed in response to the services and the things that exist. Because I think we have kind of a gift, like I said, that not every one of the folks on this list has, and that's that we are sort of represented throughout the county by different agencies and different, you know what I mean? So we have kind of this network that may not exist in some of these other capacity funds. So the potential for outreach and support and kind of us all being subject matter experts in kind of different areas could maybe lend well to some of the work plans that the capacity funds that exist already have, that we could maybe uplift.
Sounds good. Gigi?
Yeah, I mean, my question would be, is there any opportunity for us to look not at us having the money, but how the funds could better be used to achieve the goal of reducing racial disparities? When I think about joining the Racial Justice Oversight Body, it was to lend my voice to improving outcomes because of the glaring racial disparity that we see. So I'm not focused so much on the money, but how the money is being spent. And if it's being spent in such a manner to produce better outcomes for those groups that have been criminalized when they should not have been, and mental health that happens often, and it happens for African Americans and brown people more often than other groups. So it's never about the money for me, it's how the money is being spent to improve the outcomes. So maybe this group should be looking at how do we influence, whether it be AB 109 money, whether it be Metro X money, or wherever the money's coming from, how do we make sure that when it goes out, it's targeting in a very effective way, producing better outcomes and reducing the racial disparities. I don't want to build up a program that continues doing the same process that we've had in place that contribute to us not seeing any improvement in the racial disparities in our criminal justice system. More money, more problems in some cases.
No, understood. Yeah, and it seems like it's a multitude of things, meaning we don't know if we'll ever get no money, right? So that's that. So then you have this maybe hub and spoke idea where we may not have funds, but capacity building could just come from also finding all these dollars and then try to make sure that those agencies that are in the community know where they are and making sure that they all properly getting access to them and know how to, access them and all of that stuff. So that could be just as valuable as having money to pass out or to, put into fertilize the community with. However, if we don't, then maybe the hub and spoke thing is where, like she said, getting out there, talking to the agencies, seeing what they need, what's working, what's not, how to access dollars that may be, they may be eligible for, get that word out there. Some agencies don't even know when dollars are available. They don't know where they at. They don't always know. Those things too. My question is, that first part about where we go to try to get those funds, we thought maybe we were charged to build this capacity, fund originally. What's the formality for that? Do we go to the board of supervisors and ask again, or we not gonna ask? Who needs to ask? Do we need a proposal? What do we need? Do we just show up at the meeting? Do we pound the table? I'm a layman, so I'm a non-formal guy, so I'll do any dirty work, but you know, I just need to be corrected. So, you know, as a chair, I'm like, okay, now I'm in this position. I'll seek it, you know, like a missile, but you know, I just need to be directed. So, hub and spoke approach, let's find our own money approach, let's ask approach, let's also engage the agency's approach. I think they all need to be done per se. Which one is first? Who is tasked with what? How do we task each other? Is what I'm requesting this time. You know, how do we go about it? If anybody have any thoughts? Otherwise, I'll just start.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to get off because I do have pain. I will just reiterate what I said, which is
Okay.
I'm not interested in giving more money to agencies that continue the pattern of increasing the racial disparities that we see. If we're gonna be doing work and from the lens of racial justice oversight body, then our primary goal would be to, of course, make sure we're addressing the disparities. So any agency getting money should have accountability for that, and it should be included in their contract that part of what you do is look at the disparity that have existed historically, and the money you get from any source should also be working toward improving outcome for those communities that have been harmed from a system that is still built off of institutionalized racism and structural racism. And we see the disparity here in this county. So why would it be named Racial Justice Oversight Body if our work isn't primarily to address the inherent racism that exists? More money to do more harm doesn't jive with me.
I get that. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. That could have been the intention. Meaning, if you're a capacity fund building committee, are you charged to just build the fund? Or are you charged with also researching and making sure that these agencies or whoever's distributing money is changing outcomes? It sounds like something we'll be doing, but that's a whole research part. You got to go to each agency and make sure, you know, and comb through what they're doing, right, to make that happen. So that is a component that we would have to create, right? Who goes to these agencies? Who is doing the research? Who is getting numbers? And putting that together and just making sure we you know, finding out those change or the non-change. So that's a task right there. So and that's above and beyond, you know, money, because money's already being distributed. So and agencies are already tasked to do what they're supposed to be doing. So that's a whole nother angle. And definitely needs, you know, obviously it's been raised by you and also, you know, thought about by us too. So but maybe that's on our agenda, right? To add to capacity building on the oversight of racial justice. But now that may, what I'm not confused. Sorry about that. But when that sounds like the overall body, right? Because we have different components and different areas that the body, you know, is charged for. We're a subcommittee, and this is capacity building and engagement, right? So We know that we want to make sure folks are good stewards around whatever dollars they've been, granted. However, in this subcommittee, I don't know if that's our focus. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. It can be, or it could not be, but I don't know if the racial justice oversight body as a whole, the general body is charged with the piece that Gigi is speaking on.
Well, if it isn't, then maybe we should change the name, because when I hear racial justice oversight body and you use the word racial justice and we recognize we have the disparities that we have, I would assume that any work we do is to improve outcomes and, reduce the number of individuals impacted because of racism. And then I would think capacity building would mean that we would give more capacity to the organizations that have demonstrated that they're working toward that task of reducing and improving outcomes. And right now in this county, we do not have agencies at the table that are doing great work because they're not able to compete with the larger organizations. So any fund that would be capacity building would be along the lines, I think, of what Patrice was saying, with some of the grants and opportunities to even come to the table. And I know the Antioch Fund has allowed organizations that have never had the ability to get any funds because of the more rigorous RFP requirements. So capacity to me would be shifting that and doing more community defined approaches for those community members who have been most marginalized and harmed from the current system. I mean, that's what I thought. Might need to review and see if this is the right committee. Maybe it would be some other committee as a mental health subject matter expert that I should be on. Because I see very little money also going into the mental health arena. And although we have data that shows that 60 to 70% of the young people who are in our criminal, it's hard for me to say justice, in our current system are, living with mental health diagnosis. So I don't know, maybe it's the dental work that I had done today, but it makes me more intentional about how I'm spending my time. And so if that's not what this committee is about, improving outcomes, then I don't know. Is it? I mean, I want to be guessing about what my charge is on this committee.
Thank you, Marcus.
Gigi, I hear you and I definitely respect your position. I would just point out that in attachment 2 of the agenda, under building community capacity fund guidelines, it says what you're saying, right? It says that these are to prevent youth and adult community members from re-entry into this justice system. The fund aims to reduce racial disparities through in Contra Costa County through investments and services. And it also, if you go to the last paragraph of the fund guidelines, does talk about being inclusive of both emerging and established community-based organizations, including those that don't have experience with the county RFP process. So I think that a lot of the work is there, and maybe we need to refine those things to make sure that we're on point. But I think that the intention is there. We just need to now sort of put it into action, and that's where I think we can help move in that direction. But I would be curious, and if you get a chance to give some feedback on the guidelines, and maybe that's a place where we can, spend some time making sure that these guidelines are reflective of what we see the task be.
Thank you for articulating that. That was kind of like what I was saying, which way did we go? Because I think all of that is, we rolling all that up in one burrito, trying to make it all happen. But how do we do it? Because we haven't done it. So, and we know our overall goal is to basically eliminate recidivism and all that stuff. So, capacity building, and then also making sure, the work that's being done is sufficient, right? That is accurate, that is targeted, that is successful. So, do we want to talk about that, specifically, at this time?
Well, but I think sometimes you have to look at the current policies, and that's why I'm so pleased that Kendra and Peter are participating in this, because I think with their skill set and expertise, they know that you have to start with what are you asking any provider to do, and if you're not asking them to also look at how they're gonna get us to reduce the harms and the pains that we see by having so many of those individuals who come from one ethnic group that's a smaller group than others, yet they show up more often. And, I lean toward prevention versus recidivism, because it's like, I'm trying to keep people from ever having to go to jail in the first place. So that also should be a part of the work that we're doing, right? How do we break the school to prison pipeline that continues? I just got some recent data from Antioch, and you would think after the racialized text messages that there would have been a slowing down of the arrest records for young Black males, but it hasn't. Nothing changed. So even with 50% of the police force being off, the work they're doing is still contributing to a problem that we're on this end trying to fix. So for me, there would be some kind of policy work that would need to happen, especially for a city that has been outed for having racial practices.
Okay, so now we're looking at policy and we're looking at agencies. So we know who arrests people, it's officers. Me being formerly incarcerated and from, single digits to adulthood, you have the officers who arrest, and you have schools who supposed to teach. Now it's to me, it's one of those things where you're gonna always have some players unless we roll up our sleeves and get involved in every aspect of that process. So one, school ain't fun, right? School ain't fun. I got grandkids, got IEPs that shouldn't have them, right? I got we see all this all the time. My job is to get involved as a parent, as a grandparent, this and that and the other. I see that. I try to do what I can. As agencies, we would have to go in there, and you got to change a lot of stuff. How do we go about that from this committee, talking about curriculums, schools, school management, school administration, how they hand out expulsion, how they, the frequency of, Black and brown people getting expelled, why are they expelled longer? I mean, all of that has to be addressed. And then the officers, who you're arresting, why you're arresting, who you pulling over, who are you harassing, who you're not harassing, why is it so concentrated, this and that and the other. Things of that nature, things to me that I think, you have to really, really, really get involved, because they're not gonna do it on their own. So you would have to have certain, aspects of a committee or a body or something going into these places, and changing tons of stuff. I don't think half the curriculum I learned in school was, I don't even applicable. I didn't learn a lot. So, and so I didn't really participate in school. I didn't go to high school. I didn't graduate high school. I didn't do none of that. So, just speaking from personal experience, I wasn't dumb. I wasn't dumb. I wasn't nothing like that. I got college degrees, but I didn't go to high school. I didn't go to school. It never stimulated, right? Mentally. So, or philosophically, I always thought it was for somebody else. It wasn't for me, because nothing grabbed me or nothing drew me in with the, the content. So, I think if we want to approach it like that, I think we're gonna have to really try to really get involved, see if we got enough people to start really dipping into stuff. I mean, we got some real work to do. I'm putting it strongly, I'm putting it mildly. What can we do? What we capable of doing with the manpower, woman power, the people power, the person power, so, yeah, I'm ready. I'm just ready, just like you. I'm ready to roll my sleeves up with that, but I'm trying to figure out, as a body and as a committee, what should be done first and what should be the focal point and how should we go about it? Because I think that may be all of our goal, but we still need to be intentional, like you said, in how we go about it. So maybe we brainstorm some more about which thing is more prioritized to us, or if we do two things at once, or which direction we want to go in, and what is our what is our charge right now at this time? We can meet again, but that's not even. But what are we charged when we leave here today? Is it something I can do personally? Something we can do as a committee that may change the next meeting when we come back? In some kind of way, even if it's, minimal.
Can I ask a question? Patrice, I think when you spoke at the beginning, you said that the PPC asked our job to flush out and provide more detail about this proposal. Because what I was, again, kind of with me thinking of us maybe being influencers, I'm wondering if that's a place to start, try to figure out what more was necessary in this proposal and maybe use the program elements that we have in here that are really framed around reducing racial disparities to see if those elements exist in the capacity building work plans, if you will, of some of the existing people on the list that you provided, if that makes sense. So to ensure that, and I think it would still lead to the fallout that I said earlier, that once we kind of see if the reduction of racial disparities is ingrained in the work plan of these other capacity builders, we could then see, or maybe even have a better argument, if you will, that this is still necessary under this body, because although people are out here doing capacity building work, they're not focusing on the things that we feel are important to focus on. I say all that, but I should have started with, I think it's also important for the people on this list who are capacity building to also have a very real understanding of information. Like, what is our system seeing? What are the arrests looking like? Because people have a lot of preconceived, well, I speak for probation. People have a lot of preconceived ideas about probation work and the population. And oftentimes when I do a presentation, they're actually astonished by, the progress that has been made or the reduction in numbers or the things, they have an idea, but it doesn't really match the reality, if you will. Or they're missing some context, and I think context is important. So I talk about that a lot in our juvenile institution work, for example, because people will say, oh, this many kids went into juvenile hall, but they don't understand that in the month of April, we said no 44% of the time that the police called a kid, which I think is important context. So I think first we need to make sure these organizations that are capacity building have realistic collection of right now, what is the climate of our juvenile justice and adult criminal legal system. And then we sort of make sure that we flesh out all of our elements and see if those are included in some of these organizations that are capacity building. I like a real working plan. So I think figuring out where to start, we might need to sort of regroup what we have and what our climate is, and, what is it that we really want to see other people doing? Because it shouldn't be a competition, you know what I mean? I don't want it to feel like there's all these people doing the same thing. Like, let's see what other people are doing, and if they are also addressing racial disparities to address this issue. And then if not, then we build up a very specific, focused task force of a capacity building fund that is really capturing what we think other people are lacking, if that makes sense.
So it's almost like an evaluation period. Yeah, to evaluate what's already here, what's on the table. That even sounds like, something that we can do immediately to start, to start on the path of what we want to do. To evaluate what we had. I know Marcus spoke about that early on, what we've already done, and we don't want to have to duplicate no work. And then also to evaluate what we've done to find out where we need to go. I still think it's, all of it's necessary. So, anybody online want to say anything? I don't see any hands up. Just in case.
Can I just say
Kendra?
something? This is real brief. I just wanted to say something to build on what Kiki was just saying, and well, the whole conversation, I think, and Peter mentioned, so just going back to that list that Patrice was sharing, that we've been talking about, like the current capacity building efforts. The current capacity building funds. I also see that there might be a space for our job to have a seat at those tables. So like the Strong Funders Collaborative, for example, are in the phase where they're trying to come up with they're like actively right now trying to come up with their strategy and how they're going to invest funding. And if, Peter and I could be representatives there, we get invited to those. I know some of you may also, but if we could explicitly lift up our job, this subcommittee's work in those spaces. And then earlier I was hearing comments about like not wanting to duplicate or go back to the community and survey and ask questions when folks are like, but well, where's the money? I wanted to, I'm not sure if this has happened or not, but like, there have been some recent, listening that has been taking place, and I'm just going to reference the Strong Collaborative, because there are probably like 12 studies that they've synthesized to say like these are the needs that we're seeing. And I'm wondering if one action could also be this body surveying sort of like the most recent listening that's out there, to see if it incorporates the perspectives here in our job, and if not, what are the gaps, so that again, so that then they could be so that our job could be represented at some of those tables. Anyways, it's not that I'm trying to create more work. I'm listening to the conversation and trying to say, okay, well, what have we in these first 6 months, like what have we heard? What conversations are we in? And where could our job just insert itself without duplicating a community engagement strategy, without where the conversations are moving forward. I don't know if that makes sense, y'all.
It does, and we had more of that too when we was on Zoom. When we wasn't meeting here, it was a lot of people on there on those Zoom meetings. We had a lot of participation. Now that we're in person, we don't have as much. These been a lot of faces and a lot of agencies and a lot of community people too, just concerned citizens. So that makes sense too. Trying to make sure that we are in certain settings where they matter as well. Go ahead,
Yeah, I was
Teresa.
just kind of, based on your comments, Kendra, it has me thinking, I'm not completely clued into the Strong Fund specifically. I do know that the coordinator for the East Contra Costa Community Alliance, which I think is an offshoot from the Strong Fund, their coordinator actually sits on the board of the Antioch Community Foundation.
Mm.
And so when we approached them about doing a youth of promise fund, and potentially utilizing that nonprofit network to, solicit interest from organizations that probation may not have been able to tap into, that's when we started to see a few more folks come to the forefront. But otherwise, prior to that, I was not aware of whether or not, and I'm not sure if that's still the case. I don't know, Kindred, if you guys have been engaged with the Strong Fund. But my understanding was that there wasn't a whole lot of, attention specifically on nonprofits that are serving justice populations or with an emphasis on preventing engagement in the justice system.
My understanding is that they have a broader scope.
Yeah.
They are interested in East County as a region. But I don't think they have a explicit focused attention on what kind of organizations in East County. I think it's just like, if you're providing support in East County for, there are emphasis on marginalized communities of color. But when it comes specifically to addressing disparities in the justice system, I don't think they're opposed to that.
Right.
I don't think though that's been lifted up as a specific target area.
Yeah. So I think that's a potential niche that this particular capacity fund could help address. Because when we approached Antioch Community Fund about that, and though they had relationships with organizations that did a whole range of things, right?
Yeah.
Like
They do
support
everything.
seniors,
They do everything.
recreational activities, all kind of things.
They do
But when
everything.
we brought the idea, well, we not only do we want to provide many grants for smaller organizations, but we specifically want to see organizations that are willing to work with youth at risk of system involvement. And with that specific call out is where we start to see certain organizations that now there's an on-ramp for those organizations to now compete for the RFPs that we have. So I say all that to say that whatever this capacity building fund, as it gets shaped, or whether it's a matter of approaching the Strong Fund or even the Measure X dollars, I don't know, to see if there's some carve out there specifically for prevention of engagement in justice system, where there's an intention to look at reducing, that there's an intention to have a racial equity lens in that regard. Because even though the Strong Fund, many of these funds, if they're all aiming to serve, which looks like the majority of them are aiming to serve specifically East County or Central County, but largely East County, to Gigi's point, that's where all the stuff went down, is in East County, right? And Antioch specifically. So I think there's a way to kind of bridge the gap between having some targeted investments in supporting organizations in the places where, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I also offer this?
Go ahead, yeah.
So, I thank that, Patrice. I think that is really a really great summary of how you can kind of consider where the gaps are. So I think that is the direction. You're trying to get more narrow versus get more broad.
Right.
But this is, my question is more on the process, and I think it's been raised by quite a few different folks today. I'm just noticing this. I think Gigi really summarized it really well. Anything that the RJOB does is focused specifically on how do we recognize, how do we then identify and address racial disparities in the justice system. And I think that's something for the larger, well, please correct me if I'm wrong, honest question. Isn't that something that the larger body is really tasked to do? All committees have to keep that in mind, but in particular, this committee as the community engagement and funding subcommittee, this particular committee is supposed to come up with your recommendations to the larger body to then deliberate on and say, okay, are we going to put together and push this forward as a larger body? But this particular committee is supposed to focus on that, correct? Right? So I'm trying to figure out like, what is the focus of this particular committee today? The other thing is about is like in terms of also, I'm understanding that you have identified certain recommendations as our job that you are supposed to be seeing. Okay, how are we going to move these things forward? Are you also as a body simultaneously always entertaining new things to add to that list before you even check off the box and take care of those old things? Or are you supposed to remain committed, focus first on those that you've already agreed upon all your priorities for this year? Because I also kind of see sometimes like it's both.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, and so I was just curious, is that how it's supposed to be, or are we mission drift from what we're supposed to be doing? That was a question. I'm even asking folks to answer. I just want to put that out there. And then the other thing that I want to ask is, even in terms of the role of our job, is it strictly to kind of research, assess, and then recommend? Or is it also to implement? And I don't think it's to implement, because who has the ability or capacity when every single person on our job has full-time jobs, and most people have big jobs, you know what I mean? So like a lot on their plates. So I'm just kind of curious, how does our job navigate, negotiate, juggle that piece of it, where the interest is to get things going and we want to move it, but if this, our job is to just recommend, how do we resist the temptation to also suggest things that involve us implementing? So these are just questions, because as Kendra and I, as ORSJ comes into, playing more active role in facilitating and staffing this, we want to be clear in our minds, what is the purpose of our job and how we help support that purpose? Those are just the questions.
Yeah, my original understanding was that it was an advisory committee, advisory body, that we were supposed to look at things that we thought based on community engagement and the body itself being multifaceted and having many people from different areas of the county being on the board, that we would bring all this stuff to the larger body, which is like the board of supervisors or something, and then they would be well informed from those on the ground, right? And they can make better decisions. Or even we could strongly suggest certain things where they would be more, influenced to do it based on, oh, this looks like it's dire or something like that. And so we would have that, I don't know what you would call it, but we would have that element to this whole thing. And that's why we're doing it. That's what I was under the impression. But do I really know? Is it really concrete? Is it really written in stone as to what our real true intention is? I don't think I've ever really seen that in writing. But from my understanding, it was to be, to kind of like be the overseers of grassroots stuff, things that larger boards can't really do or don't do. They don't always be boots on the ground or in the trenches. And the body can be something that is a collective of many different organizations, agencies, and different types of folks coming together who do all the work and can bring that information to those larger boards and bodies. So that's what I was under the impression. So therefore, but that don't, who am I, right? I don't really know. I don't run it, so I don't know if that's correct or not. So, I'm just part of but I do want to be part of the solution. So that's why I'm here. So, but what is the solution? Or how do we go about the solution? Do we just advise, implement? That's something I don't know, because I don't really know who gave this assignment out. I just know it was available and I wanted to be part of it, right? So,
Fair enough.
I'm just talking in, I don't know, just basic terms. But so when you ask that question, that's what I'm responding to. Tell you where I was at, and what my my, my thoughts are and what I've experienced since I've been here, as to not necessarily sure about the answer to your question. I know it is to at least advise, at minimum. Implementation, maybe if we allow to, I don't know. But, yeah, I think originally it was to advise. I know Patrice, she'll correct me real easy. I don't know if she will in front of y'all, but nah. She like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So I could be barking up the wrong tree. But I think that's our obligation at minimum, is to advise or at least inform. So, and I think we can do that a few ways, but, you know, we are at least, making sure we responsible around this stuff that we has to do, and being good stewards of this. So, we definitely want to make sure that we are effective in whatever we do. That's, I think, where we're at right now, is that, hey, let's make sure, because that's a good question. If you already did something, then where's that answer? Right? We already did something a couple of years ago. Did we get any, anything from that? What did it produce, right? What kind of fruit was that? And is it, can we use it, right? If we can't, and we don't have it, then we need to get it, I guess. So, that's where we at, but, thank you, Peter. So order of business, any more comments? Anybody else want to chime in on that? Or do we want to make some legitimate, bills, some things that we want to do next? Okay, so one thing we have is Marcus's question as to, or comment as to, we've done some work based on monetary funding and capacity building, and questions around a fund, the fund, whatever. And if we've done that work, where's the information? And before we ask anything else of anybody else outside of this committee, then we need to know what we have already. So that's one thing, right? And then two, what Kiki was talking about was the evaluation part. What we have for Marcus, and then what we don't have. Kiki said, let's get those numbers. Let's take a look at where the need is. If there's a need, if there is not a need, let's evaluate, what we want folks to do, right? So if we talk about how somebody is spending money, or, where the money is going, how it's being distributed, what's realistic, what's not, what needs to be done, who's making progress, who's not, that sort of thing, right? That's another thing to look at. And then also too, what Brother Kim brought up was that, what is our real intention? Who are we, right? Who are we? First, you have to ask yourself before you ask somebody else who you are. You ask yourself. So as a committee, who are we? What are we really supposed to be doing? And does anybody know, right? Do we really know? We have some ideas, we have some stuff we've read, we've been told some things, we've been on this committee for a while, so chairs have changed, direction has changed. We all been on here through COVID. So that changed, so a lot has changed. And so what is our, as Kiki was saying, is our charge the same, right? Is our intention, is our goal the same, as well? So, I think they're all valid, things. And how can we, what do you call that? I'm looking for a word. How can we, tackle, how can we get those things done? Put them into progress, put them in motion. Anybody has any ideas, how to go about that? Please bring them to the floor at this time. You might have a way to find out, what some of the numbers are as far as maybe, let's say, I don't know, when you can look back to. I know, like, I don't know, before or after COVID, or to say, as far as racial justice goes, and what some of the numbers of the jails are, if populations have dropped, or if arrests have went down, or stuff like that, to determine, who's, we always have a concern about stuff like that, but the real numbers sometimes do be startling, because even me as an ex-offender, I know the numbers are always probably more, but they're not always as much. I've been working in jails for a long time, and sometimes, the populations in jails are down now. It's like some of these places like skeleton crew. Some of the jails that normally used to be hustling and bustling are now only using partial jails and stuff like that. Jails have just been closed, even though it's still a lot of crime going on. So sometimes you do get a little startled as to what you thought was there may not be there in terms of numbers, but it still may be disparities. So the evaluation process, you gotta comb through stuff sometime and have a real numbers, awakening of what's really going on.
Well, I think the timing of this conversation is good in terms of figuring out information, because a lot of county agencies just presented to the Board of Supervisors for their budgets. And in those budget presentations, there was a talk about racial equity and essentially every presentation, where lots of numbers and data was presented from each agency about some of the disparity issues. So maybe it's just a sense of kind of collecting, and sort of reviewing what we've heard and what some of us heard, right, from each of these agencies as far as their numbers, and like the sheriff, the DA, and public defender's office, et cetera. I was also thinking, kind of as Peter was talking, because it is one of my pet peeves as a serial subcommittee member here in Contra Costa County, that that our work plan does not represent the reality of our current situation. And I'm always having to have that conversation. So it begs the question for this work plan, because even when I pull it up, I notice that it's outdated, or it still says it's in draft form. I'm wondering if that should be the very first thing that we regroup on, is to take a look at what condition the work plan is on, and making sure that it makes sense for where we are now, especially with all that has occurred at the large body level, and then the creation of Peter and Kendra's office, and all these things that have happened over the last few months that I don't think are even reflected or weren't even in existence when the last time somebody looked at the work plan. And because, again, we the hiatus period for several months, I don't even remember how many months it was. So I think maybe that's probably one thing we can certainly actionize and maybe put even on the next agenda, is to review the work plan. and see where we are and what we said we were gonna do and how much of it needs to be updated or modified, et cetera. And then we might have a better idea of where we're trying to get and what the steps are gonna look like to get there. That would be my suggestion, because I don't know that we have a good foundation with the work plan right now.
Seemed like that work plan would also include some of the stuff Marcus was talking about as well, right? As far as what was done, you know, and what we initially did and how we want to move going forward. So that probably would be like a nice little, you know, feeding two birds with one hand, opportunity.
And then I also think it's worth reviewing at the same time or close in proximity time what our jobs work plan is. Make sure that we are not, you know, we're moving in the, we're at least on the same freeway.
What?
Cause I don't know what all changed. You know, my chief is a member there, and there have been times where I haven't been there or needed to be there because she was there. So I can't say that I'm super up to date on all of the most recent things that have occurred with the larger body.
Right. Okay, there's some things there. Anything else?
Just may I ask if we can, would it be appropriate for maybe that meeting, us to focus on the work plan, our work plan? Look at what we've done in the past, look what we're doing in future, and bring the our job work plan and let that be the focus of that meeting. And maybe we can outline what we're going to do for the next. When do the committee members turn over?
It's a 2-year term, so, look back at the exact date.
Well, so for the next year, or, you know, come up with a plan, you know, we can.
For the rest of this year.
Well, at least for the rest of this year, right? Maybe if we spend the 2 hours of that meeting coming up with a plan, and then, and hopefully delve into the work. And it looks like we have a couple of directors from the main body, so.
Mhm.
And also, yeah, so it seems like you guys have, like, what has been determined as a task, was a priority by our job is to consider what you're gonna do with this capacity building fund recommendation. And I really like what Patrice says, like, where are we looking at, how are we looking at these other efforts to identify gaps? And it seems like we have some really good opportunities for folks to kind of get funding, but are they addressing racial disparity in the justice system? Kind of seems like to me, it's really just the probation, the youth of promise fund that kind of does that explicitly outright. But the other place maybe have some opportunity to add that as a focus, as like you said, to carve out, or you're gonna have to come up with a proposal saying, you know, like, hey, we recognize East County is in place, but they're not focused on this very particular thing. We'll say, are we looking at mental health particularly, right? I mean, that's what this committee is, like, come up with a very clear proposal. This is what it should be. I mean, I think other advocates would say, well, if East County is already getting all these funds, maybe then this fund funds regions outside of East and Central counties, since they're already getting the measures. I don't know. But getting a clear proposal on what it is you want your capacity funding, what you suggest it should look like, and then have that ready when you do your joint meeting with equity. That's gonna be the first time you're able to kind of pitch the idea to some supervisors, see if that's something that they have legs, if they have legs to it, then kind of bring forward to the larger board. So I'm wondering, like, does that seem like a clear kind of logical next step? Like, that's something having tasks to do, not creating a new task, and it's pretty defined. And it's also within the purview of what this committee and what this board should be doing.
Yes, and also, I think this other stuff is still pertinent because of this committee, has been, I don't know, maybe trying to find its way, per se. So, yeah, we do need to address the fact about community capacity, fund building. And that probably would be a good way to do it. But also these other things, the evaluation, all that still has to happen too. Because we don't want no work that was done to be frivolous, right? So we don't want that to happen. And so we need to know that part still. We still need to know the climate that's out there, even for capacity building. So we still need new numbers. Like, we operate on some old stuff. And then,
So is that the next step to come back to this meeting?
yeah, that's part of what we talking about now.
No.
Yeah, man. No, you're good. You're good. Because what Kiki was saying, it's a great time for that because it's already already there, right? So they just got through reporting out and doing some things because they trying to, sure they replenish for what they're doing now. So that may be an easy, I would never say easy, but that may be a opportunity to produce that because it may already be available, probably already fresh. So, but also, yeah, that the part you just mentioned is also still important because whatever we do around the community capacity building, we want it to be in line with what's available. So if we do that in a timely fashion and determining what we want to do, then we know at some point it's going to be an opportunity to present it to somebody. So if it's available already and we're not scrounging for it, then we could just present it. So I think that's well. So is any of that making sense to everybody or somebody or what? I just want to make sure we're not just, you can at least hear us. I don't want to be
So, well,
whispering.
I actually have a question. So when you're speaking about, bringing back numbers, what can you clarify again, what specific data points or?
I think because I made a comment earlier about, us needing to make sure that not only us, but the people who are also doing capacity building know what the current sort of climate is in our county or in the spaces that they want to work in terms of, who needs the most help and where the racial disparities exist and kind of what is really happening here. And so when I forget who said something, but I was just thinking that because we just heard all the county agencies really give us data about their referrals and their racial disparities and, what's happening. And I was just actually looking at some of the notes I took from the budget meeting, like what's happening where I think the information is already there. It's a good time because everybody just kind of reported on this for the last fiscal year. It's a good time to see kind of where we are and where some of the disparities are existing. We heard about, like, even one of the first things I looked at was like the clerk reporter saying that they were hiring for DEI positions. And I was just like, so we heard all these different agencies talk about how they were going to address, or how they are addressing racial equity issues. And in turn, they gave us numbers and data. So I just think there's something there that we can work with to where we don't have to do a lot of digging because we just learned about it from essentially every county agency.
The only distinction there would be that, not sure if those sort of number counts came from, if they all came explicitly from, the CJ agencies. The criminal justice agencies.
You're saying that not,
I don't think that was during the budget hearings. I think there was certainly some presentation around with their equity focus or objectives
Mhm.
or what have you, or priorities with regards to their budgets, but in terms of actual data counts or where disparities may lie, I'm not sure if all of them uniformly presented on that.
and maybe not, but I think it's worth taking a look at to see what we can sort of withdraw from those presentations in terms of, you know, DA, sheriff, PD, whoever else falls into that category, to kind of see what was presented and what information has already kind of been calculated for us.
So it may still be valid and necessary, even if it's not coming from a criminal justice agency, because we also talk about prevention, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we also talk about prevention, then it could be any agency that's in the community to help with supporting, you know, racial justice from any aspect, right? Whether it be from, hey, you know, have, you know, soccer or this or that, whatever we're doing in the community to make sure that underprivileged or at-risk youth are not going to jail, then that still could be, those still could be, you know, crucial numbers. Even though that's not a criminal justice agency, they're trying to support the criminal justice system by not placing folks there, right? So the numbers could still be valid, in terms of looking at what's out there and what's helping the community from racial justice standpoint. You know, because criminal justice and racial justice, I think racial justice is more broader. Criminal justice is more narrow because it's based on criminality. But racial justice covers way more ground because it always involves jails.
Well, and another component I think of those was which I know this subcommittee and the body has looked at quite a bit and talked about quite a bit, are the sheriff's report. I forget the name of it, but that one obviously gives us a lot of information about who's moving into our jails. And I'm just gonna say, one thing that always stands out to me when the public defender's office is talking, and I knew I had a note in it about it somewhere, that's could speak to a law enforcement agency arrest issue, is how many the really large numbers of acquittals and mistrials or partial acquittals that take place, as I've heard that in other presentations outside of this county. And when you have a really alarming rate of people who are arrested, but then later either found not guilty or acquitted, you know, whatever, it really makes you kind of wonder what's happening here between the point of arrest and the point of acquittal. And I think what we heard the public defender say was that 64% of the things that they worked on had an acquittal, a mistrial, or some in between, which I think is a really big number that really calls into question, you know, how are these people ending up before the court? Not just, you know, it's just it always interests me because I've you know, heard other agencies and other counties and other spaces talk about that as well. And I just think it's something that probably needs to be a deeper dive, sort of needs to go into, because I can only imagine that there is a disparity in that number. And we need to kind of whittle that down. So so that's why those presentations really kind of came into my mind, is because I think it would at least give us kind of a climate of kind of what has happened the last year or so in our county, to see if it's better or worse, or, you know, kind of where we are, to figure out how to better fine tune the elements of what we think a capacity fund should have in terms of racial disparity, and really match it to what we're seeing our criminal justice agencies report about in terms of disparity. And I think included in that is, you know, hiring practices, and there are things, because I know that one of I think it's the Strong Fund, where their focus is really leadership, which I love, leadership development of leaders of color, I see in there. And so that kind of made me think about hiring and staff development practices of some of our agencies, especially when you have agencies that have kind of a higher percentage of non-people of color staff that are serving a large percent of population that's people of color. So to me, those are really crucial areas of making sure that the right kind of staff development, capacity building takes place, because, you know, you need to have a certain lens, and you need to be, you know, an advocate in your space to make sure that you're not contributing to the disparity. So those are my thoughts. I mean, I still think we need to start with making sure that our work plan is completely fleshed out and makes sense. And to figure out how to build onto it from there, to make sure we're on the right path, because a lot of us were not the same people probably that were that were talking about it initially. So just to make sure that there's some clarity.
Yeah, because we know that arrest rates and conviction rates are two different rates.
Exactly. So
Two different entities. No, who gets bound over for municipal? Go ahead, Jill.
Thanks. I'm just gonna echo some of what Kiki just said, you know, the sheriff's oversight, quarterly oversight reports, I think are really valuable, have a lot of really good information and can always contain more information if you all feel there's more data points that need to be added in, but in there, they're now including arresting agency. And I think to back into what Ronell was saying, when you look at arresting agencies that have a high arrest rate, that may be an area that you can look at for diversion, more diversion in community. But the task and the original task of the Racial Justice Oversight Body is to reduce disparity in the criminal justice system. So before you throw your net too wide as to all the different department presentations, which all we're supposed to include some sort of a diversity, a DEI lens per the board chair this year. I think that there are some key agencies that that you could review. I know the public defender had stats in there for the first time I've ever seen. I know the DA talked about having an issue pulling data out of their system, but perhaps they found a solution for that. So it would be good to get some more of that data. So I think some of the data that's out there already could get you going in the right direction to determine where the need is. And again, if you review those sheriff's oversight reports, it would be really good if you feel there's data missing to speak up, because there hasn't been anybody that's really spoken on those recently, and it would be good to have input from the community.
Yeah, I was gonna say thank you. Good point. Yeah, and there goes our oversight, right? So as long as we're looking at data, evaluate data, that's also oversight. So that's definitely in our DNA. So definitely, that's one of the things we definitely need to do. Can we bring that to our next meeting?
Which one? Bring what is it?
The report
Yeah,
of some of that data.
we can bring the latest sheriff oversight report, which was presented actually immediately following the budget hearing. So that's the most up to date report.
It sounds like a plan. And then to evaluate all of that as well, take a look at it, and some of that might help us produce what we want to do as well. As far as what's needed, what's jumping off the page, what may be less or more of what we already thought. So I think that's a good starting point for evaluation, is having that report at the next meeting.
do you have any idea when that, if it was a meeting, the PPC meeting happened at all, that maybe I could watch or something to figure out kind of what the notes were around what more they wanted from this capacity?
Oh, yeah, I don't think it's not recorded, but we
Oh.
can find the minutes on.
Oh,
it.
okay, okay,
That's
okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to uplift that the proposal, the community capacity fund proposal draft that's here. In it, it has the capacity development model. Again, a lot of this was largely, I think, from conversation with Jewel Legacy Group.
Mhm.
And so you can match that against the actual evaluation summary report. Because the elements of our previous 8109 capacity building network, or if you will, it was structured very similar to what they're calling out here. So if you want to see, you know, again, lessons learned from that, that can maybe help inform going forward with the community capacity fund. Or what you all should take into account as you're thinking about how the community capacity fund should be structured. I think this is a good report to review if you hadn't had a chance to.
Thank you.
And also too, the work plans as well, correct?
Yes.
So those two items are big.
So what I will include though, for the overall, our job work plan is the one that the full body reviewed, at the previous quarterly meeting, the one prior to that, identifying the priorities, the objectives that will be prioritized for this year. So, that way you can see that in comparison to you guys' previous.
Sounds good. So it sounds like we're on the right track. Anything else we left out that we want to make sure is at our next meeting?
I would say that, you know, this was lifted up at the last quarterly meeting about, it's on the second page of the agenda, the emergency community crisis response funding.
Oh, yeah.
This came up in conversation about, you know, that in response to when situations like what took place in Antioch happened, there is no funding sort of readily available for community to respond. And that the hope through the development of community capacity fund would initially, or just in previous RJOB conversations, would initially consider funding for like community healing circles and things like that. So that's where that comes from, this sub-bullet here from that conversation, and that it may require that this be separate from the community capacity fund, rather than being incorporated.
Included,
Yeah. So just wanted to uplift that. If that's something you guys want to continue to talk about for the next time. And then 5 and 6, you'll find these in your work plan. So
Okay.
it'll be covered there.
Yeah, Gigi did bring that topic up last meeting around the crisis,
Yeah.
you know, availability to seek out, you know, some kind of trauma help, you know, therapy, like you say, healing circles, all of the above that may allow someone to, you know, manage their trauma through, and I talked about that a little bit too, because, you know, it's interesting because of a community who is always targeted or has been most largely targeted by an agency like, say, the police. You really want all your conspiracy theories to be debunked. You really want them not to be true. Because it's almost heartbreaking when they are true. It's like, oh my, so everything I thought was valid? This is horrible. I can't win. So it confirms that you really up against it. So you really you hope and wish that they're not true. And when when you get confirmation that they are, it's like added trauma. So the crisis thing I thought was a really good, really good suggestion. So just putting that out there, just saying, you know, kind of like comment on that, that I'll put a period on that, and because we're getting close.
I know we don't have time to discuss that, but
No.
I do see that as being separate. So that is
Yeah, yeah,
something that we
Yeah.
should focus on.
yep. What was that? I mean, you know, we went to the,
You have led us through the waters, sir.
don't even start. I'm accepting that. Y'all good though. Y'all good. I did it to you last time. I was like, I think you'll be good for this. This is great. I think you everybody else.
Great job.
are.
Before we got our next steps, Chair, would you like to adjourn us to the next meeting?
Absolutely. We have nothing else at this time. Per Patrice. I thank you all for your time. This was very valuable. It's needed. So thank you all. I appreciate your support. And we have nothing else at this time. We'll adjourn the meeting until our next meeting.
Thank you.